They told me to leave my father's funeral. The words came neat and practiced, like they had been rehearsed the night before. This is a family service, Veronica said, one hand on my elbow, her voice soft but sharp. She had been my stepmother since I was 14. A surgeon's smile, a collector's eye. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The usher glanced at her, then at me, confused, waiting for a nod that would make things simple. I stood there with my small clutch and the tissue that had gone damp, trying not to cry the way I used to in our upstairs hallway, as if tears would change anything. My name is Lydia Heir. I was the first family, the shadow family, the inconvenient chapter cut out of the next editions. My mother taught high school literature and spent years refusing to say a bad word about my father. She called him brilliant. She called him complicated. When she got sick, I watched him send flowers and lawyers. He kept me on a stipend, clean and quiet. He sent me birthday emails that looked like they were written by an assistant. Wishing you well. No call, never a call. The chapel smelled like lilies and lemon polish. A slideshow hummed above the altar. My father was a cold mountain in most of those photos, a beautiful winter no one could touch. In one image I recognized the cufflinks I used to turn over in my hand when I was little, pretending I owned something that belonged to him. In another, Veronica held his arm and leaned in toward the camera, her son Damon at her side, the three of them braided into the life I watched from the sidewalk. Please, I said. I didn't know what I was asking for. Space. Mercy. A chair near the aisle where I wouldn't be seen, where I could cry without it being a scandal. Veronica's nails were nude and perfect. She pressed a little. I stepped back because I have always stepped back when she pressed. The usher looked relieved. I turned, ready to leave, ready to be good at disappearing. I saw faces I knew from news articles and charity boards. Partners. Rivals. A few cousins who had decided early on that blood was negotiable. My father's attorney, Michael Chin, stood near the back. He watched me with this careful focus, as if he had practiced in a mirror what to do if he saw me. His eyes moved slightly, a tiny nod toward the side door that opened into the narthex. It felt like a handhold. I slipped into the narthex, away from the lilies and the photographs and the way Veronica could erase me with 2 syllables. The church carpet muffled everything. My heartbeat was loud. Michael followed a moment later, closing the door behind him with a sigh that sounded human in a morning built out of porcelain. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it. He had been there for my mother's probate years ago, when we sold the house with the blue porch and I packed our life into 5 boxes. I tried to insist you'd be seated with the family. I was overruled. His voice dropped. Lydia, can you stay until the end of the service? I need to speak with you after. Why? I asked. I didn't trust Hope. Hope was a hallway with a locked door at the end. If they want me gone, I can go. Michael hesitated, as if any sentence he began would be the wrong one. Your father left more than flowers this time, he said. He left instructions. He glanced toward the door. And something that cannot wait. His face tightened, as if he felt the hour twist. I felt a familiar ache rise, the one that was both grief and anger and not knowing where to set either down. Instructions, I repeated. The word tasted legal. It tasted like a chance. My hands shook, but I nodded. The organ began in the chapel. People settled. Through the door's frosted glass I could see Veronica's silhouette, precise. Stay, Michael said. I'll come find you when it's time. I leaned against the cool wall. The organ swelled. The slideshow advanced to a picture of him smiling, a rare one, taken on a boat I never stood on. I closed my eyes. I was not going to leave. Not this time. And I knew, with a clarity that scared me, that something inside this service would finally name the thing I had been made to live without. I found a pew in the last row of the chapel, half hidden by the hymnals. No one stopped me there. I watched my father's life be narrated in gentle phrases. Visionary. Relentless. A leader who sharpened everyone around him. The eulogy was polished, the way all complicated men are polished at the end, edges sanded, shadows turned into noble obstacles. I watched Veronica dab the corner of her eye and rest her wrist on Damon's sleeve. He was 30 now, straight jaw, expensive grief. He'd been the son in every annual report photo for a decade. He had the posture of a crowned person. When the pastor asked those who loved my father to stand, I stood. So did the board. So did the cousins who no longer sent replies. It felt like standing in a tide and trying to be noticed by the moon. After the blessing, people began to drift toward the reception hall. The air in the corridor turned into whispers. I heard my name once, twice. That's her. He had another daughter, yes. No, Veronica never, the rest went quiet when I passed. Outside the hall, a woman in scrubs waited near a floral arrangement. She looked out of place in all that black silk. Her badge caught the light. I recognized the logo of the hospice where my father had spent his last days. She looked relieved when our eyes met, as if I were a problem she had been sent to solve. Miss Harrow? She asked. I'm Sienna. I took care of your father at night. I was told to give you this. She held out a small, heavy envelope. Security tape. My name in his handwriting, which I had not seen since I was 12, and he'd written a note to excuse me from Jim. It hit me like a pulse. I reached for it, then pulled my hand back, as if taking it would set off alarms. He asked you. Every night, she said. He wanted to be sure you'd get it. He said I'd know you because you'd look like you were scanning every exit. He was right. She flushed. I'm sorry. That sounded rude. It sounds true, I said, because it was. I'd spent my life memorizing doors. Sienna's eyes softened. He talked about your mother. He said he didn't deserve her kindness, but he saw it again in you. There was no performance in her voice. Just a worker who had watched a man at the end of his story try to write one more page. Behind us, the hall doors opened and closed in a rhythm of condolences. I could hear Veronica's laughter, shaped for sympathies. Damon's low answers. I slipped the envelope into my clutch, feeling the weight change everything I was carrying. Thank you, I told Sienna. She nodded and disappeared into the crowd, already someone else handing her a plate and a napkin, already being thanked by people who didn't know the difference she had kept at night. Michael found me before the first tray of champagne passed. He moved like a man who headlines other people's storms for a living. Come, he said quietly. There's a room we can use. We wove past a pair of executives measuring grief in strategic phrases, past an aunt who blinked at me as if I were a ghost in the wrong story. Michael closed the library door behind us. The room smelled like leather and cedar. Framed photos of my father shaking hands with senators watched from the walls. A portrait of him, younger, hair still black, stood over the mantel like a judge. I received this at 5 a.m., Michael said, laying a flat package on the table. A messenger from the hospice. Your father couldn't sign in person, but he executed it according to the law. 2 witnesses, a notary. He also asked that you be the one to hand it to me. He thought it mattered. I stared at the sealed envelope in my clutch, then at his packet. We were a small courtroom, and the case had been waiting to be called. Veronica arranged a private reading of the will with the family after the reception, Michael said. She insisted the company officers attend as well. I will go, of course. But there is an addition. He placed his fingertips together. A codicil. The word sat between us, quiet and heavy. In stories, codicils change everything or nothing. They arrive late and make people honest. Or cruel. Before we talk, I said, I think I should read this. I took out my father's envelope. I didn't sit. I felt steadier on my feet. The seal broke with a ragged sound. Inside, there was a letter, 1 page, and a smaller envelope stapled to the top edge with a red tag that read, For Mr. Chin, from Lydia. My father's handwriting drifted in a familiar slant, the way rain leans in wind. I looked at the first line, and my breath went thin. Lydia, I have to begin with I'm sorry. I kept reading, heart ticking, the library lamp making a warm pool over the table where Michael waited without interrupting. The letter wasn't long. It didn't have speeches. But every sentence felt like he had placed a stone in my hand, as if he wanted to be sure the weight was real. When I looked up, nothing in the room had changed, and yet I knew the rest of the day would not be what Veronica had rehearsed. My father's letter was plain. Plain in a way I had begged for when I was young and thought the right word could fix a year. He wrote about my mother first, the way she would leave notes for him on the kitchen counter, a bowl of clementines beside them, forgiveness arranged like a still life. He wrote that he had listened to the wrong person for too long, that fear disguised as protection had cost him a life with me. He said he had made a promise, very late, to be brave for once in a way that wasn't about money. He acknowledged me by name. By date of birth. By a memory so small I almost cried. The yellow raincoat I wore when I was 6, the one I called my sunshine coat. He wrote that he remembered the sound it made when I swung my arms, vinyl whispering against itself, a small weather. He said he should have taken me to the park that day. He said he had told himself there would be time. Enclosed, he wrote, were 2 things. The first was the DNA report I had submitted on my own last year, after yet another Christmas went by with a wire transfer and no call. I'd sent a request through his assistant, more curiosity than claim. The assistant had never responded. My father, it turned out, had seen it. He had made his own appointment. He had signed his name on a lab form like he was signing a treaty. The results, tucked behind the letter, were simple, decisive. A percentage that took away the alleged, the maybe, the we will see. The second enclosure was a notarized statement and a codicil to his will. He wrote that he had wavered too long, swung between being decent and being afraid of the people who made his life easier. He wrote my name again. He wrote the words I had never expected to see, not on paper with a seal, not in a world where he didn't say them even in private. My true heir. The phrase landed without fanfare, like a bird coming home. He did not give me everything. He did something that felt like him and not him at all. He placed the controlling shares of the company in a trust he named after my mother. He made me the trustee. He left the house at Waverley to me outright. He left Veronica a substantial annuity, because he said dignity should be funded if possible. He left Damon the lake cabin and a grant to start something that was not my father's shadow. He did not leave either of them a crown. Finally, he asked me to do one thing in public. Not for theater. For clarity. He asked me to deliver the sealed codicil to Michael at the funeral, in front of the people who always pretended I was a rumor. He asked me, if I could, to say my full name when Michael asked whose hand had delivered it. Not a performance. A correction. I looked up from the letter and met Michael's eyes. He had not interrupted. He looked like a man who had sat with a widow in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. and found the right sentence. He asked me to wait for you, he said. If you gave me this, I was to proceed. If you didn't, I was to delay until tomorrow, and then proceed anyway. He wanted you to have the choice of whether the first air this breathed would be near him. I held the smaller envelope. It was heavier than it looked. If I hand this to you, I said, what happens? We walk back into the reception, he said, and I ask for 5 minutes before the private reading. I announce that your father provided a late executed codicil. I ask you to confirm that you delivered it as instructed. I hand it to the notary who is waiting on call. We witness the seals. And then we read. Veronica will explode, I said quietly. She will try not to, he answered, because the cameras in people's heads are still rolling. But yes. She will not be pleased. I set my father's letter back in the envelope, careful not to tear anything. I slid the DNA report behind it, the way you put proof away when you plan to show it. I felt something inside me unknot. Not the whole knot. Just a strand. Enough to breathe. There was a knock on the library door. The pastor's assistant peeked in. Mr. Chen, she said, the family would like to gather in 10 minutes. She hesitated when she saw me. Is this a good time? It is, Michael said. He turned to me. Lydia. I thought of the hallway where I learned to cry without making a noise. I thought of my mother sleeping on the couch after chemo, the sound of the humidifier, her hand making slow circles on my back because words were too heavy. I thought of Veronica's light touch on my elbow, the way she assessed me like a candle that needed snuffing. I thought of the photo of the cufflinks that never belonged to me. I handed the envelope to Michael. Let's read, I said. He nodded once, solemn, as if knighting the air between us. He slid the envelope into his leather portfolio. One more thing, he said. Your father asked that, when the time comes, the true heir's name be spoken clearly. The way it would be on a contract. The way it would be on a deed. Are you able to do that? Yes, I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. I am. The reception buzzed the way rooms do when they are waiting for a headline. Glasses chimed. Someone laughed too loudly and then softened it with a hand over the mouth. Veronica stood near the fireplace accepting polished condolences, one wrist draped like a ribbon. Damon orbited her shoulder and nodded at the right times. When Michael stepped into the center of the room, conversations folded. He had that quiet authority that makes people want to be seen listening. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, forgive the interruption. A legal matter requires a few minutes before the private reading of the will. He did not apologize beyond that. He did not smile. He knew this was not a cocktail announcement. Veronica's expression cooled a few degrees. She moved without hurrying, a cat walking toward a closed door. Michael, she said. We had arranged to conduct family business privately. She glanced at me and almost managed to make it look like kindness. Lydia, dear, perhaps you would. Michael lifted a hand as delicately as if he were stopping a string quartet. Your husband left a codicil that must be acknowledged in the presence of the principal witnesses. He asked that the hand delivering it be identified. He looked at me. Miss Harrow. I stepped forward. The carpet softened my steps. The portraits on the wall seemed to lean in. I could feel the room assemble a narrative around me, the way water assembles around a stone. I kept my shoulders low and my jaw loose. My heart was loud, but the rest of me was very calm, the kind of calm that happens when you finally walk straight into the thing that has been following you for years. My voice carried without effort. I delivered the codicil to Mr. Chin as instructed by my father in his letter. My full name is Lydia Grace Harrow. The silence in the room made a space for the rest. It felt like a threshold. And by his written acknowledgement, witnessed and notarized, the true heir named in that codicil is me. No gasps. Just the sound of the heat vents, the small mechanical breath of a building pretending it is alive. Then, like a dropped plate in slow motion, the breaking. Veronica didn't turn red. She went pale, the kind of pale that erases lipstick. Damon's mouth opened and closed, a fish lifted into light it didn't ask for. Someone in the second row of chairs made a sound like a laugh and swallowed it whole. Michael did not hurry. He took the envelope out of his portfolio and passed it to the notary, who had appeared like a conjurer's proof, pen ready, face neutral. The seals were observed, the signatures verified against IDs and registry. Michael unfolded the paper and began. It was not long. It did not wander. My father's lawyer knew better than to write a poem. He read the operative clauses in a voice that had ended boardroom wars. The trust named for my mother, the control of the company placed in it, me as trustee. The house to me. The annuity to Veronica, specified to articulate not charity but respect. Damon's cabin, a line that suggested he might build something of his own. The conditions of governance. The statement of acknowledgement. The final paragraph was short enough to memorize. Let it be known, Michael read, that the person I acknowledge as my heir to these enumerated assets is my daughter, Lydia Grace Heir. This acknowledgement corrects my prior failures, which were mine alone. It is not an indictment of those who counseled me, but a confession that I allowed my fear to be named protection. I ask for dignity in this correction, but it is not contingent on anyone's approval. My throat tightened. I kept my face steady. Veronica set her glass down very carefully on the mantel and spoke without looking at me. This is outrageous, she said. My husband was not of sound mind at the end. He was on morphine. The witnesses, Michael said, were the hospice chaplain and the attending physician on a day your husband's chart reads alert, oriented, pain-controlled. The notary was not affiliated with the hospice. If you wish to contest, you may, but you will not be doing it in this room, and you will not be doing it today. Damon found his voice. You don't get to stroll in and take everything, he said to me, like a man who had been promised a sky and saw someone close the roof. You barely knew him. I was there every day. I met his eyes. You were, I said. And for that, I'm grateful. He left you the cabin. He left you enough to begin a life that isn't only this one. I kept my tone level. The room could hold a truth without me turning it into a weapon. I'm not here to humiliate you. Veronica laughed once, a sound with no joy in it. Then what are you here for, Lydia? Correction, I said. The word felt right in my mouth. And stewardship. Michael cleared his throat, not to command attention but to shift the scene back onto its tracks. There will be a proper reading with counsel present later today, he said. For now, the legal effect is immediate. He looked at me. Ms. Heir, as trustee, you may address the officers. I turned to the row of executives who had been trying to become lampshades. We will meet Monday at 10, I said. We will keep payroll steady, and we will review the mentorship and scholarship programs my father funded. There will be no sudden moves. We will honor the good and audit the rest. I paused. And today, we will grieve. I didn't look at Veronica when I said it. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't spectacle. It was the quiet turning of a key in the correct lock. The room's energy shifted, a collective decision to breathe again. Conversations resumed in low voices, the way people talk near a hospital bed. I stepped back, and for the first time in years, no one told me to leave. I felt my father's last sentence like a hand on my shoulder, light, not claiming, only present. The true heir's name had been spoken. Now came the living with it. The house on Waverly looked different when I unlocked it with authority instead of apology. The air still held the faint scent of my father's cologne, the citrus and cedar I had associated with doors I couldn't open. I walked through the room slowly. I touched the back of the leather chair where he liked to read reports. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the maple tree I remembered from my childhood visits, its leaves holding the late light like they were learning a new language. I did not cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt a tiredness leave my body the way a fever sometimes does, quietly, in one long exhale. Monday, I met the officers. I listened more than I spoke. I kept the programs that lifted young people through the company from the mailroom to engineering. I expanded a scholarship in my mother's name, placing 10 new chairs at a table she would have set herself if she'd had the money. I asked for a full audit of the supplier contracts that had smelled like favors. I learned 3 names in the first hour that had mattered to my father and had been kept from me. I wrote a note to each of them, in my own handwriting, not with an assistant, and I signed my name the way he asked me to say it. Clear. Not a stranger. To Veronica, I sent a letter, not a declaration of war. A firm document that honored the annuity and set the terms of her residency at Waverley while she found a new home. 90 days. Movers provided. A decorator if she wanted someone to make a smaller house feel chosen instead of betrayed. She didn't respond directly. Her lawyer did. The language was cold, but the arrangement would hold. I read it, then went to the kitchen and made tea the way my mother taught me and understood that sometimes the best revenge is the refusal to let someone else define the terms of your gentleness. To Damon, I wrote a different letter. I told him about the community college that offered night classes in industrial design. I told him I would fund the first year with no strings if he enrolled. He didn't answer for 2 weeks. Then he sent a single-line email from a new address without his mother's signature at the bottom. Okay, it said. No punctuation. A start, however small, still counts as a start. I asked Sienna, the hospice nurse, to meet me for coffee. She was nervous at first, as if she had stepped into a story that didn't belong to her. I put her at ease the only way I could, by telling the truth. You were the person my father trusted when it mattered, I said. I want to thank you with more than a card. I set up a loan forgiveness fund for nurses who worked nights in hospice. We named it the Sunshine Coat Fund. When she laughed and cried at the same time, I felt something in me stitch up in a way that was not perfect, but durable. On a Thursday, I drove alone to the cemetery. No entourage. No lawyer. I brought a thermos of tea and a small bouquet of flowers from the Waverley garden. The headstone was new, the letters still sharp. I sat on the grass and read him the final paragraph of his own letter, the part where he had asked for dignity, not permission. I told him I was trying. I told him I wanted to live as if the correction had been made early enough to inform the rest of my days, even though it wasn't. I told him that I didn't know if forgiveness was a clean word. I knew it was a real one. The wind shifted and brought the sound of traffic from the avenue, a low river of people going places that had nothing to do with me. I stayed until the thermos was empty. I stood and pressed my palm to the cool stone. You were late, I said softly, but you were clear. It would have to be enough. Some stories are not fixed by their endings. They are simply steadied. On my way back to the car, I passed a family gathered at another plot, a grandfather in a hat telling a story to a child who kept asking the right questions. For a moment, I imagined my mother at our dining table, reading aloud, Clementina's on the counter, my father at the doorway listening, not leaving, not making himself a rumor in his own house. The image held for a few seconds, gentle in a way that didn't hurt. Then it slipped away, leaving the good part behind. At home, I opened the windows and let the autumn air move through rooms that had been curated like a museum. I took the portrait of my father to the study and leaned it against the wall, not over the mantel like a judge, but closer to eye level, like a person. I placed my mother's photo beside it. I sat at the desk and began to write a letter I wished someone had written to me when I was 13, a letter for a girl who needed to know that families are built every day, and sometimes the first brick is a boundary. When the sunlight climbed the far wall, I read what I had written out loud. My voice was steady. I was learning to hear myself the way I had always wanted him to hear me. The house listened without judgment. The maple tree outside wrote bright sentences against the glass. This is what revenge looked like in the end. Not explosions. Not speeches. It looked like stewardship, and a quiet door that stayed open when someone worthy arrived. It looked like a trust named after a teacher who believed small words could save lives. It looked like paying the bills on time and telling the truth without cruelty. It looked like saying my own name in a room where it used to vanish, and then walking out into the day with both hands free. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.